Prakritim Swamavastabhya
Prakritim Samavastabhya
Visrajami Puna Puna
Visvijami Puna Puna
Bhutagramam Imam Krishna
Bhutagramam Imam Krishnam
Avasam Prakritir Vasat.
Avasam Prakritir Vasat.
Okay, I'll just do the translation and purport just because to just save a little bit of time. So this is the translation. The whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again, and under my will, it is annihilated at the end. Purport. The material world is the manifestation of the inferior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This has already been explained several times. At the creation, the material energy is let loose as the Mahatattva, into which the Lord, as his first Purusha incarnation, Mahavishnu, enters. He lies within the causal ocean and breathes out innumerable universes, and into each universe the Lord again enters as Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. Each universe is in that way created. He still further manifests himself as Kshirodakashayi Vishnu, and that Vishnu enters into everything, even into the minute atom. This fact is explained here. He enters into everything. Now, as far as the living entities are concerned, they are impregnated into this material nature, and as a result of their past deeds, they take different positions. Thus, the activities of this material world begin. The activities of the different species of living beings are begun from the very moment of creation. It is not that all is evolved. The different species of life are created immediately along with the universe. Men, animals, beasts, birds, everything is simultaneously created. Because whatever desires the living entities had at the last annihilation are again manifested. It is clearly indicated here by the word avasam that the living entities have nothing to do with this process. The state of being in their past life, in the past creation, is simply manifested again, and all this is done simply by his will. This is the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And after creating different species of life, he has no connection with them. The creation takes place to accommodate the inclinations of the various living entities, and so the Lord does not become involved with it. So Hare Krishna everyone, and welcome to His Grace Lalita Nath Prabhu.
Thank you.
So today we are discussing this very beautiful purport of Srila Prabhupada, and in this purport he is directly addressing two theories which are very prominent in the world today. He is giving an alternative to the Big Bang cosmology, the idea of where the universe originated from, and Srila Prabhupada is also giving an alternative perspective on the variety of species that we see in the world and how all of that variety came about. And these two explanations of Srila Prabhupada go quite contrary to what the modern world feels about some of these issues. So today we're talking about science and spirituality. And Lalita Nath Prabhu, before we get into these theories and the Krishna conscious or the Vedic response to some of these prevailing theories, I wanted to ask you, was there ever a time in your life when you believed in these theories of the Big Bang or the evolution?
Absolutely. Of course, Big Bang is a later thing that gained foothold after I had become a devotee. So, but evolution, certainly, I was raised or trained in school in evolution, and I was an atheist. It's funny. I was raised in a family where religion was kind of just a formality, not very deep, and like Christian. cultural Christian, we call them here in Denmark. And I didn't think much about it then, but at the age of was 15, then all children are going to what is called confirmation. And I was also going through confirmation practice. And there I became convinced this doesn't make sense, at least what I was taught there. So then I became an atheist. Of course, I was still so-called confirmed, because there was no question not being confirmed.
So you did believe in these theories, and
afterwards, then when in my days we have what's called gymnasium. You know what it's kind of high school, college overlap there. So there I was studying science and so on, and there I was completely accepted theories of evolution and so on. Later on, after leaving gymnasium, I was traveling for a few years and got exposed to many different things that I had not been exposed to before. And at one point I actually became convinced God exists due to some experiences that actually there's someone there. So then, but then evolution as such, I didn't think so much about it. Then I came in touch with Krishna consciousness. And then, and with Krishna consciousness also Prabhupada's talks on evolution, Darwin, and life comes from life. Prabhupada, he has a very fantastic book called Life Comes from Life, where he argues strongly against evolution. And also Prabhupada had devotees who had a scientific background establish his Bhaktivedanta Institute, where they mainly were confronting these materialistic and atheistic ideas which are being packed and presented as science, and that's especially evolution. So I was, in my early years as a devotee, very much reading these things that came out from these scientific devotees, such as Sariputta. We had one devotee living with us in Denmark, actually, Gyanadas, who was one of the early members of the BI, Bhaktivedanta Institute, and so on. So it's something I followed up through. And it meant a lot for me, because since you have someone who has kind of not a huge scientific background, but still you want to understand things in a scientific, rational way. And I had doubts. It turned out I had many doubts from this scientific background. So I found it very, very useful for my development and my faith in Krishna consciousness, conviction, to actually study and see how these materialistic ideas, such as evolution and, well, let me get back to Big Bang in a moment, but especially about evolution and materialistic ideas, actually how flawed they are, and and actually that they basically they cannot be true. They are actually, and that really made me, and I think many other devotees, very, very strong, you can say, scientifically convinced about Krishna consciousness.
So that's just to come in there. Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada presented it as a spiritual science.
Yeah.
And this, for some people, is quite interesting, because they generally see spirituality and science as separate worlds. They create somewhat of a demarcation. Spirituality is subjective, science is objective. So can you say something about that kind of notion that spirituality is subjective but science is objective?
Okay, that's of course a modern notion, a notion that comes very much from the Enlightenment, and from the time of especially Darwin and onwards, that there is this dichotomy between religion, spirituality on one side, and science on the other side. So you have science, you have positivism, which is also very much the same thing. You can only accept what you positively can verify, and so on. It has not always been like that. If you look at the Western culture, it's often been presented as if religion and science have always been at loggerheads, but that's absolutely not correct. Science came out of religion. The first scientists, the early scientists, and here we can talk about Newton and Galileo and Kepler and at the whole, all of them, they were very religious people. And not only that, but religion motivated them to get into science, because they, in the Bible, it is stated that there are two books of God, two words of God. One is the Bible, and the other is nature. So they had the idea, let's read the book of nature to uncover the glories of God. And that was what they did. And you see Newton, he was such a strong Christian. He wrote lots of books on theology and like that. And they also, by the science, became more religious. And that was going on all the way. Actually, religion, and especially the Christian church, came under attack basically from the Renaissance, which is like 1500s, and then onwards over the next centuries, from political circles, economical interests, some philosophers, and so on. But scientists, actually, if you look at it historically, that was, you could say, the last bastion that protected religion. So
I think one scientist, he says, all I'm doing by my scientific research is finding out how God did his work.
Yeah, I mean,
So that kind of notion that through the science we're actually verifying and deepening and nourishing our understanding of spirituality and religion.
Yeah, and I mentioned also, I think to you yesterday, I don't know if you think about the same, but one contemporary of Darwin, actually, in 1858, Louis Agassiz, very, very big scientist in the 1800s, he also wrote that science, said natural history, but that means science, biology, should ultimately come to the point where, or the goal is to understand the thoughts of the creator. That is really what science is about, to understand what is in the mind of the creator.
But then the question may come that there's a move away from science and religion, and what caused that move away? And could it be that there were certain things that scientists were discovering, or certain findings or empirical evidences that they were coming across which caused them to doubt religion?
That's a good question. I would say actually it's not really the scientific findings that make the scientific community atheistic and materialistic, and especially of today, with the latest discoveries that has been done in all fields, but especially in the field of biology over the last 50 years or more. I mean, the evidence, you can say, of God in biology has never been so strong as it is today. There's, and also in physics and cosmology and so on. So it's not what is actually being observed and discovered that is justifying atheistic conclusions. But what the breaking point was definitely Darwin's publication of his book Origin of Species, which somehow or other struck a nerve and really, within 10 years or something like that, the whole mood in the scientific community had changed, and you had to be like an evolutionist, a natural evolutionist, in order to be accepted within the scientific community. Natural evolution, Darwin is promoting natural evolution. That's important to understand. Natural means there is no creator behind it. You can, of course, because some religious people, they have then taken to the idea, yes, there is some evolution and so on, but that's God's way of unfolding a creation. But so therefore, it's important to understand. Darwin, he talks about natural evolution. It means everything can ultimately simply be explained by matter by the laws of physics, chemistry, and that everything, life arises spontaneously, spontaneous generation of life, and everything just evolves on its own through the laws of nature over millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years. And there's no creator, there's no God behind or anything like that. This is really Darwin's idea. It caught on. Why it's caught on is a very good question, and it looks like there was a deliberate campaign to establish evolution in the community of science. There was a group of scientists. Darwin was one of them, but Darwin was not very aggressive. Darwin was a very kind of a recluse kind of person, living in his mansion way out in the English countryside, and just peacefully going around, writing his books and studying his books and whatever he was. But others, such as there were Thomas Huxley, one name was Tyndale, number of persons were very much, invested with the idea, let's spread and, make evolution prominent in the scientific community. And they managed somehow or other to get control of the publications of scientific knowledge. The journal Nature was founded at that time by Thomas Huxley. It's the leading scientific journal nowadays. But that was founded in those days by Thomas Huxley with the express purpose of promoting evolution. And so somehow or other, yeah. Anyway, it takes an historian to really get into what happened, and it's yeah.
But the very interesting picture that you're painting is that originally science and spirituality, science and religion were very much hand in hand, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Because especially when it comes to life and biology, all scientists say this is simply too complex to be something that can explain itself. Life, it cries out, that there is a creator behind. And that was, all scientists, so that this is obvious. It's such an obvious thing, you cannot.
I wanted to ask you, just slightly diverging from that, have you ever come across any scientific evidence or findings or studies that have caused you to doubt Krishna consciousness?
Yeah, you can. There are many issues that come up that can cause doubt. For example, Prabhupada, he writes here in his purport that all species are created simultaneously and have always existed. So that could be a cause of doubt, because it does seem that life has not always been the same as we observe here. So I kind of reconcile that with the fact that the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada, does not talk only about this planet Earth, he talks about the universe. So it might be that not all the species have been manifested on this planet all the time, but they manifest somewhere in the universe. This is how I reconcile that, and I don't go further than that. It's not a, but as far as the conclusion that there is that God exists, that there is intelligence behind, and that we are actually existing in the creation. No, I have not come across anything that can, question that conclusion.
Okay, interesting.
It's rather the opposite. The more you study it, the more it becomes. It's everywhere. The evidence is everywhere. It was either Max Planck, or Heisenberg, one of these two great quantum physicists, who said that if you drink a little of the glass of science, you become an atheist. But if you empty it, you become a theist. You become religious. So it's a fact. If it's actually ignorance of science or just superficial acquaintance with scientific facts, that can make you an atheist. But if you really get into the details, I mean, there's
Yeah. Can you actually define for us what is science? What is actually science? Because everyone seems to have a different definition of it. And can you then, from that, tell us why Krishna consciousness is a science?
Well, it's a funny question because, and if I could, I would probably be quite prominent or famous, because philosophers of science, they have a big disagreement of actually what does science actually mean? How do we define science? Especially if you want a scientific definition of science. How can you give that? I mean, that's circular logic. You cannot. So how exactly would you define science? Science, as we know it, natural science, as we have now, arose from the world of philosophy. In one sense, philosophy and science are more or less synonymous in one sense. And actually, if you go back to the time of Newton, he wrote maybe the most important book in the history of science, called the Principia, and it's written in the 1600s. But he doesn't use the word science anywhere in that book. He talks about philosophy, and he uses the word experimental philosophy and natural philosophy, and that is the word that was used in those days. Philosophy at that time means all endeavors to achieve certain knowledge, and but then with the development of science and experimental science, Newton was a great experimenter, and he made systematic experiments and observations and mathematics to analyze it like that, and from Newton onwards, experimental science becomes experimental philosophy starts taking up bigger part of the world of philosophy, to the point where in one sense it becomes an entity of its own. So the word science was then coined in 1830s, I believe, by one man named William Whewell, in British Englishman, and he said we need a word, we need a term for this part of philosophy. So he's called it science, and he was a great theist. He was not an atheist. So it wasn't that he saw there's any opposition between science and religion. He just that's where the word science.
So even the word science came from a religious person.
Yeah. But philosophers of science, they have big discussions on what is science, and there's ultimately one. What was his name? Paul. Anyway, he said actually science. That's what scientists are doing. And what is a scientist? It's someone who does science. So I mean, it's hard to define, but we could maybe say it's any process that leads you to certain knowledge. That could be one definition of science.
It's a certain process that leads to knowledge.
Certain knowledge. Yeah. But then.
So then, how would you, if someone asked you, how is Krishna consciousness a science?
It is a science because it's you can actually you have a whole, you can say, a theoretical framework, and then you can practice it and you'll get results. So that, in one sense, you have theory, you have the test, the experiment, and then you can draw conclusions based on that. So Krishna consciousness has all the characteristics of the science, because there is a consistent theoretical framework, and that can answer, basically all the questions. It's a consistent philosophy, and then you practice it, and you get results. Of course, seeing Krishna face to face, if that's the result you're looking for, that might, so then we can say maybe then, if that is what is the criterion, maybe then it's not science. But we certainly get results by, we see that our passions and so on, our lower nature is definitely goes away. We become more established in goodness. We become, in control our mind and senses. We get satisfaction from a source that is not material. That is like there's this verse from the Bhagavan, the Sanskrit, which says that just like someone by eating you experience free pleasure,
nourishment, and freedom from hunger.
Yeah. So the same way, by practicing Krishna consciousness, you also you get happiness, you get freedom from material attachment, and what was the last?
Nourishment of the body, direct experience. You get pleasure, tusti, pleasure, pushti, which means nourishment, and shud apayo, which means freedom from hunger.
Yeah. So
that is if you eat.
Yes, we eat,
Yeah.
but if you practice Krishna
Krishna
consciousness,
then you get a pleasure and immediate joy. Pushti relates to a direct experience of Krishna, and Shuddhapayo means you become free from material desires.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of realizations by practicing Krishna consciousness. You can definitely something is happening when you practice Krishna consciousness, and then we also, of course, we follow in the footsteps of those who went before us, and they have many realizations, and we have their testimony that actually at one point you even realize Krishna directly, and you come to the level you revive your original spontaneous nature, and so on and so on. It has a characteristic of a science. It's not a belief only. But of course, belief and science are also intertwined. Scientists, they have an awful lot of belief. There's so much belief in the world of science. And some of it is necessary in order to practice any science or anything. You have to have some belief to start out with, because otherwise you cannot act on anything. And you have to believe so many things which are beyond your senses. You have to believe what is the statement of other scientists, what they are saying. You cannot test everything and verify everything for yourself. And then also it turns out there is an awful lot of blind belief, and I would say even superstition, in the world of science, which of course is not science, but you have a scientific community. And it's also, there's so much superstition in that world of science, and the theory of evolution is one of those things. I would say that definitely falls into the field of superstition, because the funny thing, you can say, the proofs are not there, the evidence is not there. That's one thing, but even the theory is not there. That many get surprised. There's not even a theory of evolution. Darwin, he proposed somewhat a theory in his book. And that was very soon, 15, 20 years after, completely disproven. It was his theory of inheritance. It was based on inheritance, because you have to explain how does new variety arise in a species. So there's one biologist said the big question is not the survival of the fittest, it's the arrival of the fittest. Where does the fittest come from to begin with? It's obvious those who are most fit will survive. But where do new traits arise from? So Darwin had the idea that inheritance works by acquired traits being passed on to the next generations. Like if, for example, if we go to gyms and we build up big muscles and become like that, then I'll get children with bigger muscles. Or if some pale person like me, I move to sunny country and I get suntanned, then my children will get darker skin. But inheritance does not work like that at all. It is inherited traits. No, acquired traits are not passed on. It's like, and there's so many examples from that. For example, there are, in some cultures, the women they beautify themselves by enlarging their, for example, their ears and their lips and so on. You've seen they have enormous ears and big lips and looks very beautiful. And but still, even though they've done that for generations, all girls who are born in those cultures are born like girls everywhere else. It doesn't affect them. And they made experiments. They would, after Darwin, they would experiment on mice and cut off the tail of mice and then see. But little mice, they were still born with tails and so on. So they discovered this idea doesn't work. So actually, Darwin's theories immediately lacked a mechanism to explain.
So there's not one agreed theory, it's constantly evolving.
It's an but so Darwin's original idea were disproven, and then actually evolution as such was kept hanging in the air for quite a while. And it was not given up because somehow or another it had caught on also just in the whole society as such. So we just evolution was taken for granted. And then later on in the 20th century, they developed a different theory called Neo-Darwinism, where the idea was that genetic mutations are the source of new variety. Because it was discovered that actually, as I say, the acquired traits are not passed on, and it turns out that actually all our genetic material is passed on unchanged from generation to generation. When there's sexual combination, they are being mixed, but it's not a new genetic traits arise. They're simply just being mixed. Just like if you have a deck of cards, you mix them and then give out a hand. So we have different hands, but not just by mixing the cards you create new cards. That does not happen. So that's basically what genetic traits are. They're just being mixed and passed on unchanged. But then we discovered, but then sometimes there is a change anyway. There are no changes, but then rarely there are changes, and they were first called
mutation.
First they called them freaks of nature, and later on they got the word mutation. So actually the word mutation is not from Darwin. That's a later thing. Many think Darwin talked about mutations. He didn't. That's a later thing. So and then in the 60s it was discovered that these mutations they come from the DNA, and when the DNA is copied, sometimes there is a mistake in the copying of DNA, and this is what mutations they are. So these mutations they became the proposed source of new traits. But when you look at that, that doesn't make any sense.
So many of these things are in your book, Rethinking Darwin.
That's
we can just have a look.
Sure.
So this is the book that you've written, Rethinking Darwin. And when you brought this book out, was there any response from scientists or any kind of response to this in the world? It's quite a provocative title, so did you get any?
Mainly I got response from devotee community. I sent it out to scientists also, but I didn't get any response. Scientists are busy people, for them, and they have stacks of books, and just some unknown writer, he publishes a book. It's hard. It's hard to get someone to
pay attention.
Yeah, devotees have responded. Many devotees responded and appreciated and liked it very much also. But from the bigger world of science, no, I didn't get any big response from there.
Sure.
I mean, I was working with scientists writing the book. It's not only that I wrote it. I had, of course, many know Druta Karma. He was involved with it. And I also had other secular scientists reading the whole manuscript through and discussing and so on. So in the writing phase.
And going back to Druta Karma, Michael Cremo, who wrote Forbidden Archaeology, Did that have an effect on the scientific community when it came out?
He got some reaction, some response. Yeah. I mean, some responded to it. It did not create the effect and the waves that it deserved to create, because actually his discoveries are completely revolutionary. You know, he actually discovered that there is evidence of humans millions and millions and millions of years back, which you can say in one sense also addresses this point. We read in the purport, Prabhupada writes that species, there has always been the same species. Someone will object, but we know there has only been humans for the last 100,000, 200,000 years. Well, do we know? Dusakama actually showed no. Well, looks like a lot of evidence has simply been pushed aside that shows that there was actually a human presence of human beings like us millions and millions and millions of years ago, and that has been documented by professional archaeologists and geologists all through the last now almost 200 years.
And he talks about a knowledge filter whereby all of that evidence is then not brought to public attention because it goes contrary to the prevailing theory.
And not in the way, it's also an interesting point. It's not that he postulates it's a huge conspiracy and scientists and archaeologists are a part of a big cover-up. Many of them, they're honest scientists and trying to understand what they have found.
But they don't know how to process that.
Yeah, and we're conditioned by what we expect to find. That is actually the point. If you talk about archaeology and you have an archaeologist finding something which is completely against his expectations, he himself has a hard time believing actually he found it, and will try to explain it away within the framework context that he's kind of used to think of. And so that's, and then even if he accepts what he found himself, to have it accepted in the bigger community of archaeologists and scientists is very, very difficult. And it turns out there will be a double standard of acceptance of evidence, that which confirms the expectations is very easily accepted, not questioned very much. But something that goes against it will be questioned and doubted and critiqued, and over again. There's one example of there was a fully modern human skeleton was found in 1912 in East Africa, and it was dated, and it was something like 1.5 million years. Fully modern humans, Homo sapiens skeleton. But that was being questioned and doubted for next at least 20 years. Even some scientists insisted, we want to go to the spot where it was found. And they had to take this German scientist to the spot. And then he couldn't really find it, because one thing is that archaeologists particularly, you cannot repeat the experiment. Once you have found it and you have taken it out, you cannot go and find it again and see where it was. So it was, and anyway, but his discovery had to pass through a much higher level
of scrutiny.
Yeah, than what is being, which confirms the standard idea. Yeah. So that's kind of what is the basis of this knowledge field. There are some examples of also deliberate suppression of evidence. That's also there. But mainly it's this biased idea which causes uneven treatment of evidence, which is the foundation of this knowledge filter. And that applies to not only archaeology, it's actually something that goes on in all fields of science.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll ask one final question and then we'll open up to others. We've been talking about science, and you've been talking about how oftentimes they've had to evolve theories, change them as new evidence comes, as their knowledge and their understanding advances. What about the devotee scientists? Do they all agree on the way the world was created, the way the universe is structured? Do they all have the same understandings of the origins and the processes by which consciousness comes about and the variety in the universe we see comes about? Or do even those studying the Vedic paradigm also have different opinions and also change their positions?
It's a good question. I mean, first of all, devotee scientists, there are not so many actually. I mean, we have many devotees, of course, who have academic degrees and positions in universities and so on, but actually the number of those who are working in the field of natural science, biology, physics, cosmology is actually not very big. There's not very many devotees working in that. Sariputta was the most known, prominent, Karma, and then a few others are working and in writing in that field. Basically, everyone, we all accept, at least for my part, I accept what is stated in the Bhagavatam, and that. But some things, some information needs to be a little unpacked to be understand actually what it actually means. Sariputta has done a lot of that in several of his books when it comes to cosmology and origin of the universe, and not all things have been completely cleared up, but he's done good work in that. So it's when it comes to that, I have not seen there's not like a huge controversy within the community of devotees, but of course there are areas such as the fifth canto. How are we actually to understand that? And that of course is also a relevant issue now. We come up with a TOVP in Mayapur, which is dedicated to the structure of universe as it is explained in the fifth canto. So actually to understand how it actually relates to what we can observe. I mean, if you read the fifth canto, it is actually, in one sense, it's a pretty straightforward thing. But it's just the problem is we observe something else. So how do you reconcile that? How do you bridge that gap? And so that is the discussion. Some of it is that can be maybe reconciled that Bhagavatam is not really focused on giving exactly, you can say, geographical or cosmographical locations for everything. It has a different purpose. But that has some. There's some areas that needs some more light shed on it.
Discussion. Yeah. Thank you. We can open up if anyone has any question they would like to ask on science, spirituality, any of these prevailing theories. Anyone has any question they'd like to ask?
Well, I don't have a scientific bent of mind at all, and I haven't really read any of Stockholm's books. I've just given a quick glance over. But is there any explanation in the Vedas as to the origin of the pyramids of Egypt and those kind of things?
It's a little different topic. Very, very important, very relevant topic, because it's stated in the Vedas, in the Puranas, in Mahabharata and so on, that we had advanced civilization on this planet before. It was not that we, and it's actually interesting, the theory of evolution is extended into history and modern history. So so modern humans evolved from some primitive simians, apes-like, and then we had primitive human cultures, Stone Age, primitive Stone Age, more advanced Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and gradually we have evolved, and now we are at the pinnacle of advancement, and we have never been so civilized and technological advanced as we are now. But that's not what we find in the Vedic scriptures. There are descriptions of very advanced cultures in previous times, and that actually history is cyclical. It repeats itself, and so on. So so, and you can say actually the pyramids is a great confirmation of that description. I mean, to my knowledge, there's no mention in the Puranas or anything like that of the pyramids as such, but that you have pyramids, which actually we would have a hard time building nowadays, which cannot have been built by a Stone Age culture. I think it's pretty obvious, except to historians, maybe. But for most people, it's obvious that you cannot have this. This is not possible, and it's not pyramids. It's just one example. There are all over the world. There are structures which defy explanation, except that they must have been very advanced. I know in Lebanon, some of the largest stones moved ever are found at a place called Baalbek. Are you aware of that? I have a presentation where I'm actually discussing that. So Baalbek is an interesting place. It's a Roman structure now, and was a temple for Apollo, but the foundation is not Roman. It is from some previous unknown culture, and the foundation there is built of massive stones, where three of the stones are weigh 800 tons each. They are rectangular blocks of stone that have been moved from the quarry 1 kilometer away, moved to there, lifted 6 meters up above the ground, and fit together so perfectly you cannot even get a knife in between them. How did they do that? 800 tons, just to compare, one of the biggest Boeings weighs something like 340 tons. Just to, for comparison. I was writing about an article about that place once, and then I called a company, a crane company here in Denmark, and said, can you help me? I have an 800-ton stone. I gave the dimensions, and I need to move it 1 kilometer and lift it up 6 meters. Can you do that? And the woman I spoke to said, yes, no problem. We'll cut it up in pieces. And then I said, no, that's not possible. You have to move it as it is. And say, my goodness, I think we need some help then. And then she asked, where is it? And then I said, northeastern Lebanon. And said, are you making fun of me? And then I said, yeah, I'm making, and then I explained what but then she connected with me with an engineer. And actually then I spoke with him. And until 1970, we had no cranes that could lift anything beyond 400 tons in the world. Now we have bigger cranes, but they also depend on, they're running on tracks, and how did they do that in the past? So that's one example. You go to India, and you started temples there and so on. This is built by advanced technology. It's not built by primitive people or people just with hammers and chisels. It's simply not possible.
You have done this video that's on YouTube, on the Radio Krishna YouTube channel, where one can see all these, let's call them wonders.
Yeah.
Where they have made like stone rings of different kinds of stones, but they are together, like in a chain, like.
Yeah.
You did all that, didn't you?
I did.
Just presented it.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah.
Then you can see all these, like, let's call them for science weird stuff.
Yeah.
How could it be?
Yeah. How do you have? One sense, I mean, maybe a good sculptor could make a stone chain, but then when you have two different kinds of stones, they have a sandstone and a granite joint. How do you do that? Yeah. So you have that in the, what's that called? Vishnu Kanchi temple, quite famous temple. We have the stone chains in. But anyway, so that it's a little different topic from this evolution. Anyway, it's of course it is about science and history and antique history and where Vedic culture comes from, or where do we come from, and so on. It's also a very important area of investigation, but it's not one area I'm super expert on. I know something, I've read something, but yeah.
Then a more controversial, like, how can the North Star be fixed if the Earth is spinning?
Oh, that's not a problem because you have the axe pointing towards there. Then that would cause us to see that as fixed if you have a geocentric or even a heliocentric.
But then like if I'm standing here, then I'm standing at the end of the axe or what? Because I can see it is standing still in front of me, then I must be on the axe.
Yeah, I mean it's so far away, so you don't see just because you're circulating doesn't see.
But if you take a picture of the stars, it seems like they're revolving around the North Pole or the North Star.
Yeah.
But how can that be if I'm flying through the universe? And how can that be?
But you're flying through the universe.
Yeah, like it's expanding and the Earth is spinning and the Sun is spinning. You know, like the scientists are saying.
But I mean that is. You have so enormous distances. So what is called parallax cannot be observed. It's too far. Distances are simply too great to observe parallax.
But it's still, like, if you take a picture, they're still spinning around it.
Yeah. I mean that, but that's of course you get into cosmology. Is Vedic cosmology geocentric, heliocentric? That's can be discussed, and probably my take on this is that's relative. You can have your center anywhere, and then you can be heliocentric, geocentric, and so on. But no, that's not difficult to explain. If you have a planet that is spinning, this is precisely what you would see.
And you have like our solar system is spinning within a big galaxy, and like
but that's over hundreds of millions of years that you don't observe with the naked eye.
No, but if you see like how if you take like all these spinning things and put them together in a line and see how it all spins, it seems a little difficult to take like something to look into the universe and have a fixed point like the scientists are doing when they're watching the stars. It looks like the star will get out of their monocular or whatever.
Yeah, it will also, but I say the distance are astronomical and the times are hundreds of millions of years. So we do not observe this in a day, or in a year, or in a lifetime even.
So that with the different layers of the universe we have, as described in Srimad Bhagavatam, that's all just spinning around, or do we have like the Earth, Bhumandala plane, and then we have the other layers above that, and layers...
It's a good question, exactly how to... Like the Bhumandala, according to Sadapuda's calculations, is not the Earth, it's a solar system, which is a plane. You have the sun, and then you have the different planets in a plane spinning go around the sun, and his calculations show that actually the numbers given in the Bhagavatam and so on corresponds to distances in the solar system, not the distances on this Earth.
But it seems like in that sense the sun is fixed there, but in Bhagavatam it says that the sun is placed on a stick, let's call it that, which is on
Mount Mera and
on the edge,
Loka mountain, and
spinning around.
Yeah. You have different descriptions. You both have descriptions of the sun being fixed and the sun moving in the Bhagavatam.
That is fixed.
Yeah, you have descriptions of both, and Prabhupada states both. So there's something that has to be reconciled exactly.
So we can.
Maybe the point is that you can choose different reference points, and then the sun or the earth becomes fixed or movable according to what reference points you have. I'm not expert, so I mean, you know.
Okay, last question. Yeah.
Scientist is the most intelligent person in our world. They are very smart. They know so much, but they can't explain so many things. Why they don't live to God, and because they every day they research something, but they don't explain so many things. Why they don't believe to God?
But first of all, that they are the most intelligent amongst human beings. I don't know if you have any test for that. They're smart. They're smart. I mean, they're smart. They're intelligent. They have some sort of intelligence, but still, they are definitely humans who make mistakes. You know, who have imperfect senses, who cheat themselves and cheat others. They are not free from the modes of nature. They're in passion and ignorance. So that means that it will be imperfect, and they will cheat. They can easily cheat themselves. So yeah. I mean, you can be a scientist and stupid also at the same time. Like, I mean, you know, we are mixed also. I'm a pretty stupid person also. I have little intelligence in some ways, but I'm also stupid. So that you can be convinced that, for example, that life can arise on its own spontaneously is quite stupid. If you actually know the complexity of, for example, just a single cell, then you can get to know how complex a cell is. Like if you have Darwin's time, the thought cells were just very simple drops of some mucus or something like that. But it turns out that actually a cell is the most complex you've found anywhere. It's a piece of nanotechnology. We cannot even imagine what, you know, the complexity of it. And below the cell, there is no life. Life starts with a cell. And below that, you just have simple chemistry. How do you explain the gap there? So to think that this just happens and it just arose is not intelligent. It is. So not all scientists are. They're intelligent in one way, but then again, they're not intelligent in other ways. And we are conditioned by what we want to believe. We don't believe in God because we don't want to. We don't want Him to be there. It's a psychological thing that we do not want God to exist because we want to be controllers. Scientists have that. They're not free. Scientists are not brahmanas. That's one big problem. Brahmanas have to be situated in the mode of goodness. They have to be. They cannot be hired by someone. They should be independent. Scientists are not independent. They're sudras. Prabhupada said they're technologists, they're sudras. That means they're working for someone. When you're working for someone who's telling you what to do and so on, you cannot think independently and clearly. And if you start thinking and deviating your thinking, you lose your job, which is a situation in the modern scientific world nowadays. If you start questioning Darwinism and materialistic ideas then you actually are fired from your job, or you will not get any funding and so on. That is the actual situation in the modern world of science. So many scientists may even not believe these atheistic ideas, but they just keep their mouth shut. Many are like that.